Welcome to a Men of His Word audio recording. Men of His Word is a conference that equips Christian men to take a leadership role within their family, congregation, and community. Go to menofhisword.org to find information on upcoming conferences and resources. This breakout session is entitled Love Your Neighbor. It was given in Oshkosh on February 17th, 2024. Ryan Kolander is a pastor at Riverview Lutheran Church in Appleton. Prior to that, he served as a mission pastor in Detroit, where he raised up a multicultural, bilingual congregation.
I'm so glad you're here. My name is Ryan Kolander, as mentioned. I want to show you this picture to begin. This is the congregation I got to serve for 7 years, and this is our very last Sunday. It would have been September 10th this past year, about four or 5 months ago. And as I look at that picture, a lot of things stand out to me. People I love, but also as I look at those people, almost not one of them is from a background like mine. By the time I left the church, we had about 250 souls or so. And of all those 250, 260 people, my wife, myself, and a pastor's kid who transferred in were the only 3 baptized wells from birth people in our congregation. So as far as who you're looking at, you're not looking at everybody, of course. It was just the ones who could come that day. Jeffrey, he was an atheist from Puerto Rico. There's his American wife who didn't really have a church background. Robbie, I worked on him for 7 years, and he started coming the last 2 months of when I was there. He had Puerto Rican roots. But then you have Honduran immigrants. You have Texan people who are third-generation Texans, which is Tejano is different from Mexican. You have people from Guatemala standing in the back who are so short you can't actually see them in the picture. It's just like the coolest thing. Paul grew up in Delray, just blocks away from the church. And he had been to every church and mosque and synagogue in the city and landed with us. So as I look at this, I think, man, how did it go? How did this happen? You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like, all right, we got a Lutheran church in the city. Lutherans come out of the woodwork. Let's do this. None of them cared, right? Like, none of them cared. In fact, very few of them originally cared about God at all. And as I've reflected on it and thought about it, of course, it's number one is the gospel. The gospel changes us. And paired with the gospel, which God calls us into, is this amazing thing called love. Love your neighbor. Jesus said, by this, the world will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. So it should come as no surprise to me that so many of these people, they saw Christ's love, but they saw Christ's love through me and others who were at the church who would come in. Love became sort of a superpower in our community. In fact, I got to Palabra de Vida in 2016. You know what else happened in 2016? Who got elected to be the president? Donald Trump, who said something to my Mexican friends there that they didn't like. Mexicans are criminals. So here I come in. I'm one of the only white guys in the neighborhood. So who do you, with kind of thinning blonde hair, I'm a little tall and loud, who do you think I represented to them? It's like, oh. So I remember I walked into a taco shop with a prospect. Somebody I was kind of working on, and she was busy making tacos, and it was a hole in the wall. So there's about 30 Mexicans, and then me. I walk in, I feel at home. I'm like, all right, órale pues, ¿cómo estamos? And they look at me like, oh. And then the lady who knew me said, hey. In Spanish, she yelled out, hey, burn his tortillas, here comes Trump. I'm like, no. No, wrong guy. But I think of that, and I was wondering, should I even tell you this next part? But my wife said, okay, you have to say it just to give context. So within the next 5 years from that point on, 2021, just through connections in the community, there was a lady who was a newscaster in the Latino community, and she puts on these big award banquets every year, and it's all for the Latinos, celebrating Latino culture, business leaders, celebrating immigrant stories, celebrating that. Well, she got to know me, and she made up an award she called Friend of the Latinos. So I was the only white guy in this huge banquet hall being given a trophy, and the people who didn't know me were like, he doesn't looks kind of pale, you know. But the cool thing is it's not about the person, it's not about us. Ultimately, just the keynote today is how cool is that? Just our vocation, and what flows through our vocation is loving our neighbor. So I want to encourage you in this today and walk alongside this. Before we get into my end of things, I want to help kind of set the stage. First of all, you got a little sheet. If you're a writer, you like to take notes. It kind of should follow the PowerPoint as best that I could make it. And the other thing, to really set your mind into what we're going to get into today, this is the only time I'm going to force participation. All right, otherwise it's voluntary, but you have to do this. So we're going to take 1 minute, and whoever you're sitting next to, maybe you know them or don't know them, that's fine. I want you to tell the person your worst experience with loving your neighbor or compassion ministry. Okay, your absolute worst, like scarred you. Tell them that maybe it's nothing huge, but it's just a little thing. They gave a $5 to a guy who got a beer or something. Whatever it is, I want you to tell that person your story. I'll give you 30 seconds, and then we'll switch other 30 seconds. All right, so 30 seconds, first person, worst story, go. All right, if you haven't switched, switch. Next person tell their story if you haven't yet. Hey. Yeah, Nate, right?
Yeah.
Dude, okay. You can grab a chair. I think there's one if you want to, yeah. Everyone's kind of butt to butt. So,
no,
I
it's
don't
all
know.
good.
Yeah.
Your mic is good.
Yeah. I was gonna say, are you back over here now, or?
I'm in Manitowoc.
No way.
Yeah.
At the high school?
Yeah.
Cool.
I run their international program. So
Sweet.
Yeah.
Oh, we got to connect about that. That's awesome. Yeah, because my wife went there to Manitowoc.
That's
yeah. Moldenhauer. Sarah Moldenhauer. Okay. Yeah. All right, everybody, we'll bring it in. I heard some really good conversation snippets of it. Raise your hand if your partner had the worst in the room. We won't go through all the stories, but I was hearing some pretty just clippets in the beginning. I'm going to share mine just to kind of connect with you guys on this. So this is my very first year in Detroit, 2016, and I met a guy. His name was Rick. There were very few people at the church, so I was just desperate to find people, right? So Rick comes by, and Rick didn't have a job. He was a little bit homeless, and so it really started innocently with Rick, right? And maybe some of you probably had experience like this. He just asked me for money. Came by the church, said, "Hey, I need a 20." And then, I'm new. Sure, I'm looking for people. Here's a 20. You want to talk? He came by again, looking for 15 here, 20 there. That's how it started. Well, then I came to find out he didn't have a car. So he's like, "Hey, my sons live over on the east side, on the west side. Can you just give me?" So I give him a ride, right? Give him a ride every now and again. So his money and rides. And he was looking for work. "Hey, my construction thing didn't pan out today. Could you give me some work?" So I'm like, "Oh, sure. I could rake the leaves, I guess." Yeah, so here's like $40 for the lawn. Okay. And then he needed a place to cook his food. So nobody's using the kitchen like ever in this church because it's an old church building, and sure, so he's using the microwave. So Rick, he's around like all the time, right? And then he needed a place to stay because it was getting cold out. And so I said, in my infinite wisdom, "She can stay at the church. That'd be fine. Here's the key. Why not?" Well, a few months go by, and we're doing Bible information courses. I'm like, all right, I got my first adult confirmand. This is great. He's basically trapped here. and then spring comes around, and he leaves, right? He's like, okay, he goes back into the streets and does his thing. Well, fast forward a couple months, we're into May, and we had a cleanup day. So a couple of people who were at the church and me were walking around cleaning up what we can, and somebody was looking for a shop vac because there was all these. So I said, "Oh, I know I got 2 of those. I saw them. They're down in the cave under the stairs." So I ran down there, and I couldn't find either shop vac. Oh, man. Somebody was looking for a leaf blower. Well, I knew where that was, so I ran to the other side and looked for it. Interestingly, it wasn't there. So we needed to change a couple light bulbs, so we needed a tall ladder, 6 to 8 feet. I definitely know I have one of those graphite ones, the green one's really nice. So I run back to the boiler room. It's not there. Man, it's just, am I crazy? I know we had these things, and all of a sudden, I hear this big crash. So I run upstairs, and right in the lobby, the ceiling, because it's an old church building, the ceiling collapsed. Like, just happened. Act of God. Ceiling collapsed. Had to fix it. On to the next. Didn't think of it, right? A couple days later, one of our early members, Andrew and his dad, came to fix the ceiling, and it was a 2-day project. So they left the saw in there, like one of those nice table saw things, left it in the lobby as they were fixing the thing. And so I'm getting there, and all of a sudden, my friend Rick, first time in months, he comes back. Hey, I just need a place to crash. Okay, yeah, I'll be back later. So he came back around midnight. I suppose I heard, because one of our members was helping to kind of lock up and open up. So hey, can you just let Rick in, blah, blah, blah. Well, Rick comes, it was about midnight. Next morning I went in, Andrew and Blake went in. Rick was gone. And so was the saw. And it was like, you ever have that moment where it's like all at once, everything falls into place and you get it. And I'm telling you that story because maybe this relates to you how you felt in your worst moment, right? What does it feel like when you have been betrayed? Your goodwill, your money, your time. In my case, sharing the gospel with him multiple times, giving him the Lord's Supper. And he does this. And I remember feeling in my gut like, I will never have mercy on another abandoned child. As far as as long as I live, it was that bad. Well, Rick comes by about a month later. And he knew that I knew. He sat in my office, and I've never stone-faced. I'm a very nice man. I've never stone-faced somebody the way stone-faced Rick. And he finally got into it. He's like, I'm an addict. You know that. I just needed the money. I just needed the money. And I said, Rick, you're forgiven. You're forgiven. Let's get through this. And at the end of the conversation, he said, can I have a 20? I just need. Our guarded relationship went on like that until a few years later, he got picked up for selling drugs to an undercover agent. And he came in before he was going to serve his jail sentence. And he said, can you commune me one more time? And I said, well, Rick, are you repentant? And he's like, no. I did what I had to do, and I'd do it all over again if I had to. Now, I tell you this story because there's a lot in there. Maybe some of it you have experienced. And I want to hang kind of the rest of what I say onto that story because what I've come to see when you're doing compassion, you're loving your neighbor, it just is a mess, right? It's not like a clean, linear thing where, all right, they convert and then it's like everything's better and they're a self-sustaining person. There's no life hack. In fact, the word compassion, maybe you know this, is from the Latin words that means to suffer with. Compassion, co is like a co-worker. You suffer, passion, the passion of the Christ, you suffer with somebody. So when we go after loving our neighbor, what you're actually doing is going into the places that Satan lives, right? Satan longs for suffering. This is what he brought into the world. So where you're going is after the people who are so broken and hurt that actually need to be loved. You're doing some very dangerous work. And so I always encourage people who are, the church or whatever is thinking about starting a compassion ministry. I said, be careful. Be careful. Because what you're doing is you're going to sacrifice a lot. And you're going to suffer. So expect that. Set the stage right. And then you can get into it. So as I think about compassion ministry, and I've come to think about it, I've been serving at Riverview in Appleton now for about 4 months or so. And someone in this room is currently holding the call to the church that I was serving at. So I had to be very warn them before, don't let this influence here. It's a beautiful place. I learned a lot along the way. So reframing love's obstacles. So as you think about your story, you hear my story, and I have my obstacles then built up. Jesus makes it very clear. Love your neighbor, right? Says it about almost a dozen times. Right? That's it. Is that hard for anyone to understand? Love your neighbor. We don't have to parse the Greek. It's simple. James calls it the royal law in Scripture. It's from Leviticus all the way through Jesus, right? It's the royal law. Love your neighbor. So why are we presenting on it? Why are we talking about it?
It's hard.
Because it's the hardest thing in the world to do. Especially when your neighbor who needs to be loved, you're loving them. And in my study, I wrote a paper on this a year and a half ago, and I was really studying it. And so through that study, but also just talking with people who are pastors, but also figuring stuff out in Detroit, I found 4 main obstacles for myself and for that others have experienced as well that keep us from actually actively loving our neighbor. And I want to work just right now to take the obstacles away and maybe even reframe them so that you see that loving our neighbor is an opportunity rather than a burden. The first one that I heard a lot is mission detraction. Mission detraction. So the work of the church, the work of Christians is to spread the gospel, right? The gospel in word and sacrament. That's what we're all about as a church. So if we do any sort of active loving our neighbor sort of work, then that could detract from our mission, right? Like we can't focus all of our energy onto 2 different things. And I understand that. I think there's something to that. I want to encourage and maybe start to reframe it this way. Matthew Harrison is the president of the Missouri Synod. He said this. He said, wherever the church breathes in the blessed gospel and sacraments, it cannot but exhale mercy and love toward the neighbor. You see what he's saying? So if we are carrying out our mission of preaching the gospel, of giving the gospel to people, to one another, what should we produce? Love, right? So maybe a way to put it is compassion is the natural fruit of our gospel mission. Yeah, our mission is very clear. It's to preach the gospel. And out of that, naturally ought to flow love, the same love of Christ to us. So that's how I might reframe that first one. The second one I want to reframe is the fear of resource depletion. So maybe you picture in your churches where you're at, and you're like, man, we got evangelism committee, and we got if you're at a school, the board of ed, and we got like the council and this and the ushers, and it's like we have so many things, we can't fill them, all these things that we're doing, right? And you're like, oh, how do we? So then you're like, well, compassion, it seems like another bucket of ministry. We have to do compassion work now. Well, I want to kind of remove all the buckets, okay? And look at compassion not as a bucket to fill, but as something that flows. And it flows through everything we do, both as Christian men and as congregations. So, for example, looking at compassion ministry not as another program, but as a posture. Really cool way that I heard this framed is this, that compassion or the love of God is the same divine impulse that pushes us to evangelize the lost and to love our neighbor. You see the difference there? So rather than say, okay, we got to do the compassion thing now, it's like, no, it's just something that flows through us. And I'll talk about that a little more later. Here's a third fear that comes up so often is knowledge lacking. And again, these are all understandable. Knowledge lacking would be, okay, our church is positioned here. Over here, there's a community that's poor. Over here, there's a community of people who speak a different language or a different culture over here, and we don't know how to love them. You know what I'm saying? Well, we don't got anybody here who speaks Mandarin, or we don't have anybody who understands poverty. We just don't know what to do, right? I mean, it's just natural. I would reframe it rather than thinking, you as a person or a church, you got to like launch a big program to save the whole world. Maybe just reframe it this way: to start near and small. So look around you in your church, in your like Pastor Berg was saying, your vocation, if it's your family, your neighbor, your friend, whoever it is, who is that one person who is experiencing some impediment to being a part of the body of Christ, so being a part of the church. So maybe you got 50 people in your church, and the 50th person is really hard of hearing, and so they don't like coming to church, right? Because they can't hear. What can you do to make sure that person can hear the gospel? Maybe it's as simple as that, right? That's your person to show compassion to. Whatever it might be, start near and small. Don't think too big. Who's that one person? And then one by one we expand. Here's the fourth one, and this is the one I've experienced the most personally. And maybe you too. I've been burned before, right? Oh, Rick, because it comes up in my nightmares every now and again. I love this quote from Martin Luther. Oh my goodness. He said, if we were to act or not act in accordance with the wickedness of the world, we would never do anything good. You know what I'm saying? Right? Didn't he just hit it on the head? Ultimately, we have received one-way love. And if we receive that in worship through the Word, that's the sort of love we reflect. And I'll talk again about all these things a little more later on. So these are just to start to pick at our obstacles as we work our way into love. And just imagine if, our churches, man, that little Wells logo on our signs, if people walk by in our communities are like, man, I might not know everything they teach, but I know they'll do anything for me, right? I know they love this place. They love this community. And so it kind of reframes the scary, like churches for people who don't go to church. Churches are a scary thing, right? Maybe they got burned by a church in the past. It's a scary thing or a hated thing. But Christian love is something that undoes that. It starts to undo it. Apologetics can maybe convince a hard mind, but love can undo a hard heart. And I've seen it personally. I'm sure you have as well. It's such a powerful thing that God has given us to do. So here's our roadmap for the remaining time. Vision, set up a little vision for what does it look like to love our neighbor, or who is my neighbor. And then some ideas. This is going to be kind of fun. I want to discuss it a little bit with you if you'd like to throw out some more ideas. I have a few as well. Blessings, what happens when we do love our neighbor, what often happens. And then steps, if you know what, I want to do this. I want to bring this into my congregation. I want to lead us into this. Great, here are some practical steps to create a culture of compassion. So after each little section, we'll kind of talk about it, and if you have questions or comments, we can do that. So here's the vision. So first of all, who is my neighbor? There was a time, and looking at everyone is, probably by the chuckles, you know what this is. There was a time where it was easy to identify your neighbor. Like, oh, it's a nice guy who lives next to me, who whistles and waves when he gets his mail. But I think it's different today. And I've felt this. I'm not sure about you. If you have a smartphone, all of a sudden your neighbor becomes the entire world. So globalization has expanded our abilities to do an incredible amount, right? You can read news real time of what's going on in Israel or in Ukraine, right? Real time. You can actually be on the other side of the world. So you're staring at this little portal into infinity. But imagine what that does to your concept of neighbor. And do you sense this? So sometimes it's like, man, I see there are starving people in Ukraine. It overwhelms me, right? I should love my neighbor, God says. Well, how do I do that? Right? Or I see these kids with pots and pans around the world and they don't have anything in them. I got to save them. And all of a sudden you're looking at your device or whatever and you're like, I can't actually love all my neighbors. So it becomes debilitating. So who is your neighbor, right? I have a couple little kids. Are you my neighbor? Are you my mother? Are you my neighbor? Who is my neighbor in this globe? Here's where I think we should kind of zoom back in to who our neighbors actually are. Who is your neighbor? A neighbor is a person you have regular access to. Who do you have regular access to? Where do you have access to people? Natural places. We heard a number of them in the presentation at the beginning. In your home, in your physical neighborhood where your apartment or your house is, in your church, if you're in school, at your school, if you go to the YMCA, right? Wherever it is, wherever God has put you, those people around you are your neighbors. You don't have to save the world. There's just one person in your way at a time. Those are our neighbors, okay? But then, how do we love our neighbors? And this is where the rubber hits the road, right? Especially the ones who are in need. How do we love them? Well, let me share this with you of what it does, compassion or loving your neighbor does not look like, and I'll call it compassion fool's gold. Compassion fool's gold. There was a young immigrant man who came to Detroit because he had a sister there, and she just happened to be a member of our church. So he comes up and he's trying to get his feet on the ground and everything and go through the asylum process and everything, and he is looking for money and clothes, and he's got a little kid and another one on the way, and it's like, all right, well, he's in need, right? So I start to try to help him. Well, anyway, this went on for too long, okay? You get abused a little bit, and you're like, man. So there was finally a $100 ask. And I'm like, I don't know, that's just a lot. I know you're in need. I know you need this. So I remember bargaining on the phone for about 2 weeks. We were just going back and forth, well, no, this. And finally I'm like, well, just come to church. Just come to church, dude. We're 8 minutes away. Oh, I don't have a ride. I can't go. Well, can you come today? No, I don't have a car today. Oh, and we're back and forth and back and forth. I really need it. My kids are starving. Fine, I'll come over. Right? I'm confessing to you. Okay, I was very angry about this. So I get in my car, I'm leaving other things I should be doing to help this guy I've helped too much. And I pull up, and I'm in front of his apartment where he and his girlfriend lived in this tiny little apartment with his sister and her new husband. And there's a little kid in there. And it's a one-bedroom thing with maybe a little living area. So you can imagine, like, tensions are probably running a little high, a little hot. So there I go. I pull right up, and who should come down the stairs out to greet me but his sister? I thought, that's strange. She comes down the stairs, and we're chatting. She's a member of the church, so I knew her. And I go, where are you going? Oh, I'm going to work. And I'm thinking, I didn't say this, but I'm thinking, oh, to make money? Well, your brother needs money. And then his girlfriend came down, so that, he was a little too ashamed to do it. So the three of us are chatting, and all of a sudden she's like, oh, I got to run to work. So she gets in her car. Like, in my head, I'm just thinking, like, interesting. This is your car? So you couldn't drive 2 miles down the road to the church, which I've been specifically asking him to do for 2 weeks? She goes off. I give the money in an envelope to his girlfriend, who goes right upstairs. And I remember standing there and, like, in this parking lot, empty-handed, like I'd just been had, And it didn't hit me right then. But as I started to actually think about, what am I doing with my life? what do I do with compassion? That I had it all wrong. I had thought compassion and showing love to my neighbor was all about resources. People just need more blankets, then they'll be warm. People just need more dollars, and then they'll get their life together. They just need more whatever. Compassion is not about more resources, because there's no end, right? There's a really good book, if you're interested. Maybe I have it highlighted on the back, but it's called When Helping Hurts, if this is something you want to learn more about. Poverty, they say in the book, poverty is rooted in broken relationships. And I wish I had read books before actually going to Detroit, because this would have saved me a lot. This is really what we're going after when we're going after loving our neighbor, right? Loving our neighbor is not covering them with money. So, for example, this book lays it out. I don't know if you're a visual person, but this has helped me. We as human beings are in relationship to 4 different things. First of all, to God, but then also to ourselves, to other people, and then finally to all creation. And so what happens when one of those is fractured is that we become poor in a sense, right? It might not look like financial. You could be a very, very wealthy person and have a fractured relationship with yourself, right? You're going to need compassion. But wherever one or more of these is fractured, our job then as Christian men especially is to go in and restore relationships. This is what Jesus said about this ministry of reconciliation, right? Not giving them more, but restoring what's been broken. And so, for example, as Pastor said, the most experienced psychologist or observer of human nature knows infinitely less of the human heart than the simplest Christian, because they, like the psychologist who might be an atheist, doesn't grasp what sin is. And that's why I believe Christians and Christian churches are the only ones equipped to actually show true compassion and love to our neighbors, because we get what sin is. So we get what the cause of evil in the world is. And so I believe we're uniquely equipped to do this. So this is what it's all about, right? Compassion, loving your neighbor, is about restoration. Jesus has recorded, I think I counted 37 different miracles, 37 miracles in the gospel. And if you look carefully at them, they're not just magic tricks, right? What is he doing with each one in some way? He's restoring. He's restoring relationships the whole way. Even the wine, the water to wine, everyone's like, oh, it's a magic trick, like fun. He's restoring a community, right? That's what he's doing. All the way to this one. I love this picture because it has both things. Here's this woman who has been cut off from her worship community because of a sickness, right? She couldn't go. So here's Jesus standing in between her community with her relationship with God and her, the brokenness. And you see what he's doing? He's restoring. And that's what we do. We go in between. Another good quote that helped me understand this is this: charity, or neighborly love, that does not enhance trusting relationships may not be charity at all. So compassion is about 3 things: relationships, location. This is it. This is where it really impacts how we help. So before we go on, I'll just give a minute for that to sink in. If you want a question, maybe I'll take like one question or a thought or an idea that comes out of that. Yeah.
Where do you draw the line between enabling and compassion?
I have the rest of the presentation to do. That is the $1 million question. I mean, truly. And because when you actually do, it's easy to sit in a room like this and be like, okay, well, here's the line. But then when you do it, I mean, and like I said at the beginning, like when we go after people who are hurting, that's where Satan is. That's the tension of the world we're in, right? We're in the now but not yet. And that's why I put up there, it's messy. There's no silver bullet. It's almost like a case by case. I guess I failed at this all the way through my time when I left 5 months ago, and I still do today in Appleton. So what I have learned about the line, though, a wise pastor just passed away. If you heard of Timothy Keller, he was serving in New York City, so Presbyterian. He actually has Lutheran roots. So there's a lot of good things. He put it this way, and this maybe helps. I think sometimes, and this is my experience as well, this connected with me, we get something called compassion fatigue. So like, where do I draw the line? Where do I put it? And the reason he identified for getting compassion fatigue is because we're often reacting to situations rather than being proactive. Does that make sense? So people are just coming at you maybe. And like in my position in Detroit, it was like, yeah, just people are coming at you. It's like this world essentially of pain. And for me, that helped me to posture differently of like, look, with my limited time and resources, these are the ways I can help, or we as a church can help. Like we can do one, X, Y, or Z, or maybe just X. Like this is the thing we can do. And so when people come with whatever, I can say, you know what? Thank you so much for being here. Here's the way. We're a small church. We're doing our best to love our neighborhood. Here's the way I can help you. You see what I'm saying? So you're actually extending something like an olive branch, and make sure that thing is a relationship restoration thing. And I think we do this, and I've done this in the past, like having like gas cards or whatever, and like people are like, hey, do you have gas cards? It's like, well, you called 3 months ago. Like what? you didn't get to Oconomowoc yet? That's fine. But if you're going to do a thing proactively, have it be something with relationships. So rather than like starting a soup kitchen, have a ministry of 5 people who take soup to a person's house and eat it with them. Right? Because that's what it's about. You're restoring a relationship. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but that's kind of where I've kind of, oh no, that's a good one. All right, well, this is kind of the meat of the presentation. It's ideas. So these are things that almost to kind of let them sit with you, and I want you to wrestle with it of how do we take our neighbor and the love toward them and put this into action? So the 2 parts of the ideas, I want to first talk about how can we do this as Christian churches, okay? So the second part's going to be as Christian men, but as an organization, as a church, it's a difficult thing unless you're coordinated. So how do you do it as a Christian church? And here are 3 compassion flows. Rather than buckets, remember the flow. Not buckets, but flows. So here are the 3 flows, and I'll break them down as I have come to see them, and I'm still learning and growing this, but there's a spiritual flow to compassion, there's an organizational flow to compassion, and then a stage-based flow. So here's the spiritual flow, all right? Love starts with God. That is the simplest thing I can say today, but it is the most true. God is love. Nothing feeds into God to give him love. So if God is love, it starts with God. The way he gets love to us, and you learn this if we're in catechism classes, right? The means of grace, the gospel and words and sacrament. This is how he gives us his love, his forgiveness and all those good things to hearts, to Christian hearts. Those hearts, individual hearts, as we take that love in, we then love those around us. Love one another. Galatians 6 verse 10 talks about loving the brothers and sisters in Christ. So it's a huge thing to love the people who are Christians. But then, as that love expands, you will find something cool starts to happen, that you actually love the people around you who aren't Christians, who don't know Jesus yet, into your community. Now, here's the reason I put this up. There are 2 temptations here. The first temptation is to cut ourselves off from God and church. And that's a temptation because if we cut ourselves off from the source of our love, the only way you can love another person is from your own heart or from whatever idol is feeding your heart. You see what I'm saying? So what happens? I mean, Pastor Berg used this word a couple times that our hearts are kind of curved in on themselves, right? Like it ends up, rather than being from God into others, like we're like the channel, if it starts with me, it kind of comes right back to me. Like, what am I getting out of this? On the other hand, if we go to church, we're all about it, but we actually don't exercise love to those around us, then we're kind of like the Hoover Dam. It kind of all gets bottled up, but then it becomes perverted and dirty because we're not actually showing the love that God showed to us. And again, ironically, in the same way, it curves in on ourselves. Well, what am I getting out of God now? You see what I'm saying? If we look at compassion as something that flows from God through His church into our hearts, back into the church and out to the community, that keeps this healthy flow of love going. Matthew Harrison, again, I quoted him before, he said, "Theology without mercy renders the confession of the faith a clanging cymbal." He's quoting Corinthians, right? And then he said, "Mercy without the mooring of the church's worship life loses its Christian character." There's a second flow, and that's organizational flow. So I very much agree. Kerry Newhoff is not the only person who said this. He had been a pastor in Canada. He wrote this. He said, "As a leader, you need to embody the things you want your organization to embody." So whether you're a pastor, a teacher, a deacon, a leader, a council member, or a church member, whoever you are, if you want to be like, hey, we got to love, we got to be more loving as a church, well, you be loving first, right? Like, it starts with you. So it starts with you as a cultural leader in your congregation, whatever. But then, how does it move throughout the church? This is the tough thing, right? Like I said, we had about 250 people at our church. I would say we were probably in the small to mid, probably more small category of churches. It can really happen in a contagious way. So the pastor or a person who's just very loving, people see that and they model it, right? Oh, Susan was out of church for 2 weeks. What's going on? Go check on her, right? And it's just natural. It's organic. It happens. I would say when you're in more of a large congregation, now you're a few hundred more people, it's really hard to keep track of all the people. And all of a sudden, you're looking at the church records, like, man, we lost 500 people in the last 20 years. What happened to them? Well, there's a back door to the church too. And what a role like a deacon can do is to actually heal that. So, for example, in Acts chapter 6, there's this whole kerfuffle in the early church. There's the pastors, the elders, and they're preaching the gospel, right? And then all of a sudden, there's these Greek women who aren't getting their bread, and they get really angry about it. So there's a big church problem. And the leaders, the spiritual leaders say, we just don't have the bandwidth to be preaching the gospel and taking care of the relationships over here. What came out of that? The deacon. 7 men with the Spirit of God in them. Like Stephen was a deacon. And their role was not less than an elder. So in the Bible and the New Testament, we see deacons and elders, right? Deacons and elders. A deacon should be like this, right? That starts there. A deacon wasn't less than an elder. They had equally as important a role, but they were very different. One was in charge of the spiritual. One was in charge of the physical. One was in charge of the gospel. One was in charge of love and making sure people stayed around to hear the gospel. Right? So both those roles working together. And our congregations are all different. I don't want to spend too much time with the nitty-gritty, but thinking of a person, is it a paid time thing? Is it a staff minister? Is there somebody with special gifts for this? Somebody who's extremely intentional, an elder on the board or whatever, who is just after people right away. How are you doing? Are you okay? Proactive, right? That's the second flow in the church. And now the third flow, as love moves into us, into our churches, and then it goes out in the community. This was one of the most eye-opening things for me. I had no idea about this, so maybe this can be helpful for you too. Another book I read talked about stage-based flows of compassion. And what they meant is when you work out and you bring love to your neighbor in the community, it is paramount, you have to know what stage is that person or is that community in. There's a crisis stage, there's a rehabilitation stage, and a development stage. So, for example, in the news, a year and a half, 2 years ago or whatever, when Russia invaded Ukraine, in the news every day was Poland, right? What was Poland doing? Soup kitchens, right? Taking people in. Here's a kids center. Go sleep on the floor in here. That is appropriate relief to people who are in a crisis, right? They need to eat. They need to sleep. Now, a soup kitchen, which is excellent loving neighbor in a crisis situation, is an atrocity to be in the same neighborhood for 20 years. Because you're applying crisis stage relief to people who should be well on their way, to their children should be well on their way to developing their lives. You see what I'm saying? There was this guy, his name was Dennis Nordmo. He was a community organizer. He had been for 20 years in Detroit when I got there. I met with him week 1. And I was like, okay, just tell me what you know? And he looked at me and he pointed at another church down the road. And he said, don't you dare do what that church is doing. They run a feeding program 2 times a day. And they've been doing it for 20 years. He said, they have been destroying this community, undoing all the work I am trying to do. They're both Christian. He's a Christian man, right? Because he got this. Another way to put it, Robert Lupton said it this way. He said, giving to those in need what they could be gaining from their own initiative may well be the kindest way to destroy people. He just says it point blank, right? This was some soul searching for me because, man, I've been messing up in 100% of my compassion. So here are the flows as we start to understand how does compassion flow through us, to others, to our churches, to our communities. These have helped me. Now as Christian men, that's as a church, now as just individuals. I got a good friend by the name of Matt Rothy. We do peer coaching together. He's started a mission in Virginia, Fredericksburg, Virginia. He did a lot of studying in leadership, and he set up something called a house of leadership. So if you're thinking of your building, your house, a house of something you want to become good at. There are building blocks, foundations, there's studs and everything. So this is something I'm starting to work on called a house of compassion. If you want to be more loving your neighbor, and how to do that as a person, not a church, but as a person, here are some thoughts and ideas I'd like to share. Before I hop into that, though, anything about the church? Any thoughts or questions, something to add about church compassion? All right, before anybody says anything, we go. We'll stop after this one. So these are 10. I'll go through them at varying speeds. They're not really in any order, except this is definitely number 1. And I think it's obvious why, right? The life that we live as Christian men is always between God and our neighbor. Again, Michael Berge, he talks about this. This is part of our vocation. I love this picture. I just found it totally by accident. But it's a soldier walking back down the mountain from the cross, right? And it's a reflection of what Jesus did, often in his ministry. Feed the 5,000, and then what? Go to pray. Go to pray, do a miracle, right? He was constantly, before he died on the cross, what's he doing? He's not, right? He's with his Father. So there's this constant, it's not even a tension, it's a flow from God to get our purpose, to get forgiveness, to get his grace and his love, to fill up on the mercy that we don't deserve. We get that from our Father, and then we're back down the mountain, right? Like Peter, James, and John up the Mount of Transfiguration. Oh, the glory, Lord, the glory. Like, let's just live here. And Jesus is like, no, back down the mountain. We got more to do. Back down the mountain to our neighbor. So we have to constantly live between the two. And like I said earlier, if we cut one or the other off, we're dead meat. We can't do it. That is definitely number 1. The second part of the house here is authentic love. I don't know if this, you have to be almost very specifically the age of like 34 to 38 to understand maybe this song. I don't know. Has anybody heard? She Likes Me for Me by Blessed Union of Souls. Okay. Oh, Jacob, you're younger too. Okay. All right. No shame if you do or don't. Not a great song, but anyway, the whole theme is like this guy, he meets a girl and he's crazy about her. And the reason he's crazy about her is because he's dated all these other girls who just loved him for his things, right? Oh, she loved me for my DVD collection. She loved me for my whatever. But this new one, she likes me for me, right? You get the difference? So this kind of goes into my number 3, as we think about loving our neighbor, is seeing our neighbor as the goal rather than a means to an end. Martin Luther, when he was roasting parts of the current medieval Catholic Church, and he said there's something perverted that's happened to Christian love. That we have started to use people in order to get to heaven. And so he would you see what I'm saying? They tried essentially to keep people poor. Like they wanted the poor. People would take vows to stay poor. So that the good Christians could give alms, give them money, or give them whatever, in order to be like, hey, God, by the way. You see that? See? That's not true charity. because they're using their neighbor as a means to get to heaven. Now, that's the old church, and you think, well, we're past that today. I don't think so. What's the modern version of that? Oh, I help my neighbor. I show love because it makes me feel good. Oh, you see what you're doing? It gives me purpose. Careful, right? There's the trap. You're still using your neighbor as a means to an end. But look at Christ. How does Christ help and heal and love? It's one way. It's pure. It's seeing a person in need and saying, I will give everything for you because you're you. That's it, right? That's the end of it. So anyway, the neighbor is the goal. They are our goal. Their soul is our goal, not a way to make myself feel good. Number 4 is inefficient agenda love. I got this from a book I just read recently called Joining Jesus on His Mission. I kind of like this picture because it shows, I don't have anything in my calendar, which is, it actually makes me cringe just looking at the picture because I'm a Google Calendar person, right? Boom, 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 boom. I got all my things lined up. But his point was very clear. If you look at Jesus, he has 3 years, okay? He has 3 years to save the world. Hey, think about that. Like, what have you done the last 3 years? You're like, I don't know. I can't get to the bank on time, Jim Gaffigan said. So his point was, what do you see Jesus doing between his baptism and his resurrection ascension? Like, what is he doing? And you might think, if you were to plan out Jesus, if you were like his right-hand man, you'd probably be like, all right, Jesus, we got to go this, we got to do this, we got to go. He's just eating. He's eating food with people, for the most part, in some way. Or he's hanging out with people. Or he's getting distracted. Oh, Mary and Martha, I got a little something I'm going to teach Martha real quick, right? What? But it makes sense when you understand what love is. It's rooted in people and God and relationships. And so when you bring those 3 things together, that's love. That's Christian love. So we see Jesus doing this. It's not like, okay, I got to fill my agenda with, first, as a person in our church, we're going to do these 8 things. It's like, we keep it more open. Like, who's the one person I can love today? Who's that one person? That kind of goes into number 5, which is people over projects. Anyway, I'm not going to go through the story, but Michael Scott, inside joke if you don't get it, he's from a show called The Office. There was this time when Ryan, his intern, was messing up, and he thought he was going to get fired, and Michael Scott says, no, Ryan, bosses don't fire people, they inspire people. And then he's just a goofy kind of guy. And then he said, people, Ryan. And then he said this, and people never go out of business. And it's like the most sentimental part of like all 6 seasons or whatever of The Office, right? People never go out of business. It is so important because I've heard over my life in training for the ministry, pastors would come in and talk to me and stuff and say, the ministry is all about people. It's all about people, which is true, but it is also about projects. Like you have to prepare things, right? I spent a few hours preparing for this. I can't just come in and talk like I have to do. You have to prepare. But here's the difference. It's prioritizing. Why are you doing a project as a person, as a church? Is it for the sake of the project or yourself? Right? Like, I hope we get 100 people at this thing that we're doing, right? You're kind of using people. Or is the project, the thing you're preparing in your office and behind closed doors, is that for the sake of the people? You see the difference? So it's people over projects into people. That's helped me. Oh, two more P words, posture and presence. What do you notice about Jesus here? Kind of looks like he's dying, but he's leaning. He's down at the level of the child, and he's leaning in. And I know there are some medieval pictures where like Jesus is walking, and if you like artwork, maybe you see like it almost looks like he's like stiff-arming people. Have you ever seen those? He's like, get away from me, bleeding person. You picture him when he's healing, when he's preaching, when he's with people. It's a posture of leaning in, and his presence. When Jesus walks into the room with Peter's mother-in-law, nobody knows what's going to happen, but everyone knows Jesus is here. Right? His presence meant something. And so as Christian men too, our posture inclined toward people, and our presence, like when we walk into a room, there's not going to be gossip, there's not going to be this, there's going to be like something good is going to happen, right? Ordinary and the extraordinary. Pastor Berg talked about this a little bit. Like there's 1,000 ordinary things we do, and that's good. And also once in a while we get a chance to do something extraordinary. that really stands out to people and is the thing that people remember years later. Number 8, every person is a prospect. The story of Jesus walking, he's doing, in my mind, one of the most important things until he goes to the cross that he could be doing. He's on his way. Remember when this woman touches him in the street? What is he doing? He's on his way to do what? The woman with a bleeding problem comes in the street and grabs his robe. Remember? What was he on his way to do? Before resurrect, that wasn't even an option because she hadn't died yet, to heal her. Because she is dying. To save a dying 12-year-old girl. And here this woman, she's not dying, she's had an issue, and it's really cut her off from she comes and touches Jesus' robe, and what does he do? He doesn't do the medieval art thing, get out of here, I got a woman to save. He stops. In fact, when we read this in church, a lot of times we cut out one story or the other because it's too long. You realize that? Maybe just pastors think about these things. Why do we cut all these verses? So the people don't fall asleep. No. She is distracting him. But that teaches us something. There's a reason this is in Luke, right? What is he doing? He sees every single person as his prospect, as precious. There's never a moment where you're too busy. Because this is the 21st century issue, right? Too busy. When are you too busy to help and to love a person? That's what we've been sent to do. And so if the Lord of the world, who was on his way to save a 12-year-old girl's life, took the time to be distracted and help a person who was actually really needing it, man, that just inspires me. So anyway, el apoyo effect. Oh man, this is one I learned from my Spanish brothers and sisters, Spanish speaking. El apoyo, Spanish speakers in here? What does it mean? To help, yep. Help or support somebody, excellent, excelente. So rather than being about policies and procedures, it's about support. How can I support you? I'll tell a story now because we don't have enough time at the end. But there was a quinceañera, a family that they were Catholic and they were into a quinceañera, which is kind of like a wedding for a 15-year-old girl, like a celebration kind of thing, coming of age party. And the Catholic Church's power went out. And so they didn't know me, I didn't know them, but they knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew me, basically. So they showed up at my door at the church at 10 a.m. on a Saturday and said, hey, we bought the cake, we rented the hall, we got all this stuff, we just need to have la misa, the mass, or the service, right? Can you help us? Can you just whip a service out of your pocket and do it? And I'm like, well, what's up? When? It's today at 1. It's oh. And I'm going, I had already actually accepted the call to Appleton. I'm oh, whatever, sure, why not? I'm out of here. But I'm sitting there, and in my mind, I'm well, our policy is I usually teach 3 classes, and I really want to connect with them with the gospel. I want to visit their house. I want to have all these touch points with them. So this is actually a good thing. But and then I'm like, you know what? This is what my friends had taught me, the apoyo. I want to do whatever I can to help you, because you're the most important thing. And so I pulled an old service out, right? And I think I even left in the different name, Lluvia instead of Maria or whatever. I left the wrong names in the PowerPoint, whatever. But we did it, and afterward it was just it was kind of oh yeah thing, of course, I'm going to support you. But for them, it was the aunt and uncle. They came up to me, they were just so dumbfounded afterward, that I would actually do that. I'm not trying to make you think a certain way about me. But they were so dumbfounded about this support that they said, when is your worship? When do you guys worship? We want to become a part of this place. That's what it did. It changes people. And then finally, so important, it always involves sacrifice. We're all about setting up guardrails nowadays. I think in mental health is a big thing, and it's important, but understand, you're gonna sacrifice things when you love your neighbor, whether it's your time, whatever it is. There's going to be pain and suffering involved. We don't have enough time. I think we're at about 1.5 minutes. There are blessings. I'll just pop these on the screen. So you can, if any of them stick out while I'm just finishing up, you can see them. I just want to make sure, actually leave this up first. This is very important, maybe the last important thing. The why of compassion, why are we doing this? When it comes to blessings, don't love your neighbor in order to get blessings out of God, right? We talk about using your neighbor for God, but also don't do compassion and love your neighbor in order to get blessings from others, right? So you're using people or you're using God with your love then. It becomes a works righteous thing. But we love because God loved us. That's the why. So when I talk about blessings, don't think, oh, I want to get all these blessings. I want to get all these blessings for my church or for my life. It's like, no, love because you love. And a lot of these things actually will happen. They will amazingly happen. So I'll just pop them up there. If any sticks out, you can jot it down. I think I'll also send the PowerPoint out to Tyler Shinnick. But there are some of them. And finally, as it's up there, maybe I'll wrap up with this story. Ironically, another quinceañera. Quinceañeras are awesome. They're just like super prospect generators. But we're doing a quinceañera. I was sitting in my office. Another couple came in and with their daughter. I never met them before, but we were chatting for about an hour. And finally, they were on their way out the door. They were setting up this time and date with me. And I'm like, well, I don't think I recognize you, but how'd you hear about the church? How'd you come in? And what they did is I'll never forget this. They said, yeah, we got a friend who goes here who keeps inviting us, but we don't really want to go. We don't believe in God. But, they said, the whole neighborhood is talking about this place. The whole neighborhood. And they said, this is the place to go. And it struck me that how true are Jesus' words when he says, by this, people will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. It's so impactful among people who believe, but even the people who don't believe. It makes our faith, Christian love makes our faith so sweet-smelling to people that it can attract people to the truth of Jesus, their Savior. So I hope this has been in some way encouraging, informative, whatever you came for, encouraging, informative. And if you want, let me know. I think I'll send the PowerPoint out. There's one part for the getting traction going at your church. Pretty basic, but I can send it to you. Also, actually, it might be easier on the back of your sheet. There are a couple of resources. Like one is the paper I wrote. So a lot of this is in there. And so if you miss something, you can look at that and download it and read it. Just get the last part out of here. So, all right, that's all I have. God bless the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
If you found this useful, the greatest gift you can give us is to pass it on to a friend. These recordings are free because of the support of our donors and sponsors. To visit our sponsors, to donate or to volunteer or to find more recordings, go to menofhisword.org. James and Timothy Rudat helped record and edit these episodes, and I am John Rudat, the technical manager for Men of His Word.